All right, so let's see, where did we leave off here? I think we had it spitting stuff out to this print right here, right? Okay, so step over that. So there's all of our oh, that's weird. Oh, that's right, because I was just proving that it was going to work. Okay. So we need to go into Firebase here. Actually, I think I just click here, and that'll let me get to my console. How is there only that few projects allowed on here? Seems very, very dumb.
We give an account and password and then.
Well, yeah, I have a second account, so I can just do it under that. Oh, that's for the profile. Let's go in with a different account. Okay, we should be able to do it now. Okay. Actually, I'm going to try to do something here. I'm going to go to project settings. Well, maybe it's under permissions. Yeah. I was going to transfer it over to my other account, but not a big deal. All right, so let's go ahead and I think we already had a bunch of data, right? So let's import our, I think I have it in downloads. This is the WoW lockout. All right, so right now this is what our data looks like, correct? Okay. So let me go ahead and add the app so we can actually pull the correct data inside of our application. So we'll go back here to this, add to iOS app. Let's see, let me get my name on this guy here. So that's the name of it. Let's just call this guy Wow Lockout. We will add the app. There's the configuration file. I'm gonna delete this one, rename this one, and then go in here, get rid of this, and then drag this one in. Okay, so now it should give me all my data, right? Clean. Why is it not? Okay, well, that looks like it's the right thing. Let's try that again. Otherwise, it might be a permission thing, since I just imported that whole database. Already got that. Already got that. Oh, that hadn't been hadn't been created yet. Let's try it now. Same deal. Database, go to rules. Oh, we're doing no authentication. So the default security for this is, so this should be read is true, write is true. That'll make it publicly readable. Okay. Now it should be able to access it because we didn't do authentication. There we go. All right, there's all of our stuff now. Okay, so we want to start processing through this so we can get it to show up on the on the screen one way or another. Because right now we're showing this list of dungeons. If I remember correctly, we have a array list. Actually, it'll be a NS mutable array inside of our. Did we create a singleton yet? We have a dungeon list, and here's our dungeon list. Okay, our dungeon list is going to hold 3 different arrays. Right now, these guys are just strings. So we list our dungeons, and underneath our dungeons, we have heroic. Yeah, so it'll probably be easier to look at it in here. So dungeons, we have heroic, we have mythic, we have normal. Inside of heroic, we have a top level of each of these guys. So we want to parse through our data to be able to get to the actual information here in some sort of interesting way. So let's start piecing this apart. All right, so right now I'm just printing out the description here, but we're going to go ahead and we're going to grab, here's our data, and this guy's a snapshot of string any object. So this is going to be a dictionary where the initial one's just going to have one element in it, which is zones, this guy right here, and its value is going to be an object that's going to be another one of these guys. All right, so let me show you what that looks like. So we're going to say let zones equal data at bucket zones as string any object. Like that. Does it want me to change it to, oh, that's fine. And then let's go ahead and let's just print out zones. Okay, so I'm grabbing the data first. Then I'm going to try to grab zones from that, which should give me just my zones. Let's just prove that that's working. I'm not sure I love the way this database is organized, but it's fine, I guess. All right, so here is zones. Okay, so inside zones we have a list of a bunch of raids and we have a list of a bunch of dungeons. Now we only care about dungeons in our current project, right? So we're going to say let dungeons equal zones. I'm sorry, yeah, zones at bucket dungeons as this dude. Okay, so we want that value. Okay, so we'll prove that's working here. All right, so this should show us all of the dungeons. So we should have heroic, normal, mythic. Okay, so here's mythic dungeons, blah, blah, blah. Then heroic, wherever it is down here. And then normal. So we're going to say let normal equal dungeons at bucket normal. Let's make sure that's how it's spelled. Yep, normal all lowercase. Steal this here. And then I'm going to steal this line. We'll go ahead and grab heroic and mythic. Okay. And let's go ahead and just make sure we have that data. I know it's kind of overkill, but we don't want to go too far down the line before we know that the data that we're looking for is there, in case we're at a typo or something. So let's take a look at normal. Then heroic, then mythic. All right, I put my breakpoint there on normal, so we'll step through one at a time and we should see our list of stuff. And the reason I'm using debug description is because it gives me the whole breakout, so I can kind of see all the pieces of information. All right, so we should have already seen normal on the screen because of where my breakpoint was. So here's Eye of Ashara. It's EAH.
It's normal. You got the same copy of data and normal and hero. So
Say this again.
you got the same copy of data and normal and hero. Normal and heroes has the.
Oh, normal and heroic have identical stuff. Okay, I gotcha. Okay. Well, that's fine. So we'll step over this and we should see heroic should look the same, but mythic should look different, right? Here's our mythic stuff. There's the M on the end of it. All right, so really it's normal that the data is wrong. Wrong for? Okay. So what I'm going to do here, we're going to I was going to say we can fix it, but let's not worry about it. Because really we actually we have a couple of errors in here anyways. This is in Eye of Ashara. This should be King, Deep Beard. Okay.
You have to delete the whole thing to change it from heroic to normal.
Well, I think I'm just going to leave that alone because it doesn't really hurt anything because this is really the information we care about. These things are just kind of leftover, so it's, I don't know if I'm necessarily a huge fan of the way they wrote this. Whatever, we're going to roll with it. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's just get all of our normals showing up initially. Just so because I think right now we're figuring out who the current list is. And right now I think normal, heroic, and mythic have some different things in them, right? Here's our 3 different guys and we can toggle between them. But normal is the one that has the normal stuff in it. So what we want to do here is rather than that say, fill up with normal 0, 1, 2, 3. We want to actually get our dungeon names in there. So under normal, or under any of the other ones, we have a list of all of the kind of high level names, right? Okay, so these are the shorthand dungeon names. Like I said, I'm not sure I would have written it this way, but it's fine. All right, so let's do, say, get normal dungeon names. So let's do let normal short names equal normal dot keys I don't think so. I don't think, not in this. Yeah, so this is going to be a dictionary of strings, any object. Actually, this will work okay. So what I'm going to do is for name in normal dot keys. Let's go ahead and print name. So this should be our short name that we should get from that. So let me just move that guy right there. So this should hopefully give us things like BRHH, DHTH, EAH, those things. Okay, so here are those guys. All right, but now what we want to do is for each of those guys, we want to get the details that are further in. So that means for this guy, let's get his actual name. So we want the value at that key. Now the value at that key is actually another object. So we want the value at that key's key. Okay? So let's just get the actual dungeon names. So we're going to say let dn for dungeon name equal normal at bucket name dot key. Print dn. All right, so that should be trust me. All right, so this should be the actual dungeon names that we're looking for. EAH. Here's EAH. There's its value. Oh, we need to get the value at that. All right, so let's do let object equal normal as one of those guys. And then let's go ahead and just print object, see what that looks like. Okay. So here's each of these guys. So we want the key for each of those objects. So we want object dot, let's see. So when I print out an object, it's printing out this. Oh, it's actually an array. No. Oh, it is. It's an array. Man, they designed that really funky. So we want object at bucket 0 dot debug. See what that looks like. Because those are actually collections of things. Okay, so that's that guy. Then we want to get that guy's key. So we want let done object equal this guy as that. So now if we say done object, we should see the debug description for that guy. Let me see this guy again.
Is that object a string? Like we use toString method in Android. So.
Is what a string? This optional thing?
Yeah.
So no, that's the whole question mark exclamation point thing. All right, so this guy looks like that. So let me do that. Let's get the optional off of that. What? Is that guy that needs to be? It should be that. It's very weird. Okay, so the whole thing isn't optional. Actually, it looks like that. Okay, so the thing that's an optional is the entire object. So first, all right, so then we need to say we want that as one of these guys. Okay. So it's actually stored as a tuple? Oh my gosh, this is designed bad. Alright, so this is going to be key colon string value colon any object like that. Oh, it's already going to come out like that. We don't even need to cast it. Alright, so this should give us just the dungeon name. Oh. Alright, so those are all our dungeon names, and if I put a little exclamation point there, that'll... what is the optional? Do that. So this will be all the dungeon names, clear text. Okay, so what I can do here is I can go ahead and load those into my normal thing for right now. So we'll say normal dot, what is normal? This guy is it's a string array, okay. Self dot normal dungeons dot append that guy. Okay, that's for the normal dungeon names. This is going to be the heroic dungeon names. This would be the mythic dungeon names. This is mythic, 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 mythic. All right, let's kill that. Okay, make sure this builds. So now we can dump those things right there. And then at the very end of this, I'm going to go ahead and say self.tableview.reload data. So this will reload the data on the screen once the dungeon data has been retrieved. Because what happens is when we first load the app, since it takes some time for it to hit the database, grab those things, bring it down, parse them, put them into our arrays, and then show them on the screen. Initially, our arrays are empty. So even though we might not actually perceive it, depending on how fast the internet connection is, it's initially showing 0 dungeons because normal has nothing in it. And then as soon as we actually have crap in it, because this guy right here, this observe single event, this guy is what's known as a asynchronous call. Okay, so that guy is happening, he's happening in a non-blocking way. We're saying, I'm gonna hit the internet and get some crap, and I'm gonna also move on with life. All right, so while that's downloading or doing whatever it takes to do its thing, my app is still running, which means that the app will show up on the screen in the normal array. This guy doesn't have anything in it. It's an empty array. All right, so by me putting, this is where I actually fill it right there. That's where I actually put stuff into normal, which is in the result, the callback of that asynchronous call. So once I actually have all my data, I'll go ahead and tell my table view, there's actual data there now. Go ahead and reload yourself so you can actually show crap on the screen. That make sense? All right. So let's run that. Come on. That's interesting. Okay, so these two have nothing in them, right? But this one, but what's interesting is why didn't that actually... Okay, I have to show you, this is a good trick. Okay, so right now, nothing's showing up, right? Until I actually click something. Okay, and the reason for this is all of this crap is happening inside of an asynchronous thread. All right, which means that, so this is more of an iOS trick thing, but it actually will relate to Android as well. So when you have a multi-threaded application, so that's an application that has multiple processes running at the same time. For Android and iOS, only the main thread, the most important thread, let's say, is allowed to update the screen. All right, he's allowed to make things change on the screen. Well, this guy is associated with a less important thread. So in here, when I tell it to update the screen, it's not happening inside the main thread. It's happening inside of that less important thread. So that's why we don't actually recognize the updated screen until I actually click on something, which makes the main thread then update the screen. So we can actually fake this. We could force it. I can say, what is it? Dispatch main dot, no, it's not that. It's called dispatch queue, isn't it? Dot main dot async this. So now I'm forcing that line to happen inside of the main queue. I think this should fix that problem. No, it didn't. Let's see if that'll actually force it. Okay, this is going to be even funnier. Okay, so this is more hacky stuff. So I'm going to steal those couple of lines. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to say func reload table. And inside there, we'll actually tell it to reload the data. Now what I'm going to do is up top here, inside of view did load where this thing first happens, I'm going to use something called NS Notification Center. When we talked about design patterns, we've talked about MVC. Did we talk about singleton yet?
Yeah.
Okay, so I talk about observer. Okay, there's a third design pattern that's pretty popular called observer, which means that when you're interested in some event occurring, it makes sense for you to be productive while you wait and then be notified when the event actually occurs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have this guy, this asynchronous call after we get the dungeons, I'm going to have him raise an event. Effectively, he's going to scream out loud. And we're going to respond to that event inside the main thread by reloading the table. So what I need to do is I need to tell my main thread here, let's see, NS notification, actually it's not NS anymore, it's just notification center.default dot add observer. This will work. So we're going to say this guy's the observer. The selector is going to be, no, it's $, selector, open parenthesis, am I lying? Oh, fun. Now he could be one of those selectors. Didn't like that. Okay, I didn't like my selector thing. $ selector reload table notification. Yeah, there we go. All right, then that guy needs to be a raw value. Yep. Okay. So this is, and don't worry about the syntax. This is more, that's just Swift specialty syntax. We want to focus on more of the high level stuff here. What we're doing here is we're letting this page, this dungeon list page, he's adding an observer. So he's saying, I am interested in being notified whenever I'm allowed to reload the table, whenever that event occurs, whatever that event is. You know, I'm interested in being notified when the reload table event happens. That make sense? And when I'm notified, I'm going to call this function called reload table. That's what I'm going to do. Make sense? So now what I'm going to do is down here, we're going to notify that the table should be reloaded. Let me steal this string so I make sure I spell it correctly. So this object is listening for that event inside of this thread, after we've gotten all this stuff, we're gonna raise that event. We're gonna bellow out. We're gonna scream. Okay, so we're gonna say notification center dot default dot post the event named that guy, and we're not going to attach an object to it, and it's going to scream at me because it wants me to make that a raw value. It's fine. All right, so now this guy is going to raise, he's going to post that event. So he's going to yell out, anybody who's interested, reload table event just occurred. This guy is going to hear that event. Call his function down here, reload table, which will do that. It's possible we'll have to wrap that inside of the main queue to make it work, but I actually think it'll work like this. Because this whole screen is happening inside of the main queue, so I think we're okay. Android follows some different rules, so I don't know necessarily if I would say it's simpler.
Because when I click it 2 times, it's showing me the data. The first time it's not showing me the data.
Oh, so it's the same problem. Same problem, yep. So like I said before, it's the exact same thing where only the things that happen inside the main queue are allowed. So Android, let's see, I'll show you. Android force main thread. Yeah, I guess you'd have to do this. This would do it. That right there is equivalent to me here saying what is it? Oh, dispatch. Dispatch queue main dot async self dot table view dot reload data. There's something else we have to put in there. Do set needs display, and let's not raise that. There's a trick with table views to get this to work. Yeah, this is, okay, they're saying. so let's make sure that this guy was getting called, our notification, because that notification thing should have worked. Let's just make sure we're getting here. Just in case that function was never actually being called. Okay, he's being called. So what if I say dispatch queue.main queue.async actually we could probably do this dot sync. So I'll make this synchronous instead of asynchronous, which means it'll complete before we move on. Let's see if that does it. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, I bet you I know what the issue is. All right, let me get rid of this. Let me do the dispatch queue main, because I think this will fix your problem too, assuming this is self.tableview.reload data. So exact same code we had before, but right now we're doing all of this inside of view did load. I'm going to move that. To a function called view did up here. I have a feeling that it's actually hitting Firebase and getting the data back before the screen actually shows up, which means the table view doesn't exist yet. It's happening too fast. I'm not even going to try to grab data until after the screen is already on the screen. Then I'll try to grab the data. Then I'll go ahead and tell the table view to reload itself. I think before that, the table view didn't even exist. Let's see if we're onto something here. Okay, so that's fine. So let's go back to the notification approach then. This. Let's see what that does for us. Okay. We're going to try to do that synchronously, and that guy should definitely exist now. So it doesn't know about that table view. And this guy is a table view controller. Just tell the whole view to just redisplay itself. Killing me. Yeah, this is the thing. We tried that. Oh, actually, let me try something here. Yeah, that's calling. Okay, so that's not calling yet. Yeah, so Firebase has a thing called Firebase Ui that does this for us, but I don't want to use that. This really should have worked. Maybe raise our notification in the main thread. This is all kind of the same thing, though. All right, so we'll raise the notification on the main thread. We will then hear the notification here, and we'll update on the main thread. I think we should already be on the main thread, so that should be redundant, but let's see if that makes a difference. There's a new trick. Let's see. UI table view not updating. that. So let's not raise the notification, but instead say self dot reload table, pass that a nil. We can just do that. All right, so now I'm calling that function inside of main. Killing me. Wonder if we do this. Yeah, that's stupid. It's actually,
Doing the previous list?
no, it's working. That's just really stupid that that's the way it works. Let me see if this will self.tableview.reload data. I think this will work too. Yeah, okay. So let me dump this extra crap, then I'll explain what happened. It's actually an interesting programming concept, but it's seemed like we were really pushing pretty hard to force it to do something on the main thread. So we don't need that anymore.
It was tough, right?
Well, now that I see the solution, it makes sense.
Yeah, but if you don't know the solution, it's tough.
Yeah, well, I mean, if yours works where you have to hit the button twice, that's fine. It's not the end of the world. Yeah, so here's the issue. So up here in view did load, we set our variable called curList, which is the pointer to a string array. We set it equal to normal dungeons. Okay, so it's equal to some memory address. From that point forward, we never changed that memory address. Okay, so what ends up happening is that curList has this thing called a dirty bit. And the dirty bit was set to false. It was not dirty. It had not been changed. It did not need to be refreshed. So even though in here I was telling the table view to go ahead and reload itself, when the table view tried to reload itself, it noticed that, oh, the source array has not changed. I'm not going to waste any CPU cycles trying to reload it. It's a waste of time, right? Even though we know that the contents of that memory address did change. So by us resetting it right there, we forced the dirty bit. We changed the value to itself. So we overwrote a 5 with a 5, but it's a new 5. This is a new 5. So now the iOS ecosystem knows to go ahead and reload the thing. So fine. All right, so there's our list of dungeons for normal, and if we click on heroic, nothing necessarily changes. And we click on mythic, we have those guys. All right, now let's look at the data here again. All right, so inside of each of these dungeons, we also have a list of bosses. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to go ahead and get that list of, we want each dungeon to kind of be self-contained. All right, I'm trying to think what's the, man, this is really written crappily. This is just a horribly designed database. All right, so we're going to go ahead and right now we're just storing everything as strings. What we want to do is we want to create an object to hold dungeon information. So what's a dungeon? A dungeon is a name, and then it's a collection of bosses. That make sense? Okay. So let's create an object in here. So we're going to say a new file, Cocoa Touch class. This guy's going to be a plain Jane NS object. We're going to make this guy, he's going to be a dungeon object. Okay. And we're going to say that dungeon objects, dungeons have a name, which is a string. Okay. And then dungeons also have a boss list, which is an array of strings. Okay. Then we're going to write our constructor for this guy. Actually, why don't we have this guy take in data as a string. So for an individual dungeon, we'll go ahead and have it pass in, and it's actually not a string. This guy is, it's going to be data as a string, any object, dictionary. Okay. Now we need to go through and we need to process that data. So the same crap we were doing out here inside of our dungeon list, where, let's see, right here, this is where we actually got the name of a dungeon. So this object, that's what we want to pass in to our constructor. So normal dungeons, these guys are no longer string arrays. These guys are now dungeon arrays. Okay? Those guys are dungeon arrays. And this pointer points to a dungeon array. And what are we going to put inside of this guy? We're going to append actually, I'll just write it as the second line here. Self.normalDungeons.append, and I'll comment this guy out here for a second. We're gonna append a dungeon passing it that object. And we're gonna let that dungeon go ahead and parse through that object, pulling out the name of that dungeon, and then also grabbing the bosses. Does that make sense? Let's see. Oh. All right, so we're going to do this for all of our different dungeons here. All right, then down here, when we get the text, This guy's actually a dungeon, so we're going to say dungeon.name. So we'll still have the same output, but we're going to get that output in a different way. So what we've done now is we've moved the logic of parsing out the information about an individual dungeon into our dungeon object. But our dungeon object's going to grab a little bit more than the name. Initially, all we need is the name. But then we want to go ahead and get those bosses so that we can say, here's a dungeon object. What's your name? Who are your bosses? That makes sense? That's an object-oriented programming approach. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to steal that code right there for a moment. And what I'll do right here is I'll say self.name is equal to data.firstKey. That's where the name came from. That make sense? Okay. So we're doing the exact same logic we did before. Identical logic. We just moved the pieces into a couple different places, kind of preparing ourselves for working within this dungeon object. Okay, so let's go ahead and make sure this guy still works. Should have the exact same output as we had before. We've just kind of structured it a little bit better. Okay, so still okay. All right, so now let's go ahead and let's get our bosses from this guy. So we got the name of that. So now we want to go ahead and get our list of bosses. So let me do this. Let's do print data dot first dot value dot debug description. Go ahead and pause it there just so we can see what that dude looks like. Okay. That's just a warning. We'll see it for a second because we don't need to change it. But we're going to rewrite that line anyways. So what we should see here is the value inside of that particular object, which looks like this. Here is the, oh my gosh, did they really write it that badly? Is your database good?
Yeah, better than this one. It's got like layers of objects, so I just made a simple one.
But it has all the dungeons in it?
Yeah.
Can you export it and send it to me real quick? Oh, so it's not done. It's crap.
No, it's like, it's done up until it was useful to the previous assignment. That's it.
All right. Okay, so we're going to say let boss list. Oh, no, let's see. What is this going to be? Oh, this is going to be just garbage. Okay, so let's let A equal this dude as a string any object. Okay. Then we're going to say for obj, let's say for short name in A, let's just print short name. And that should print things like KDH and those things. So the short name for our bosses. Okay, so there's our KDH guy. So really what okay, so we're going to call this short names. For short name, let's call this short name objects. For short name obj in short name objects, we want to go ahead and we want to get short name obj, that guy, dot value at bucket name as string. Okay. I think that should give us the name of that boss. Yep. So there's our boss names. Okay. So we're going to put that into our boss list now. Yikes. So we'll say self.bossList dot append okay, and then after well, no, it should be fine. Let's just do this real quick. We'll do a print self boss list dot debug description. That'll prove that we filled the array up with our boss names, because we want to use that for our second screen here. All right, so we'll go ahead and print this real quick, and this should just show our five names. Yep, looks like we got boss names in there. So far so good. I have to yell at these guys. The guys who made this database were one of our hackathon teams. I mean, this is just garbage. I mean, I'd probably be better off with this half-done database. I haven't even seen it, and I'm confident in what I'm saying. That I would be.
Simpler. I mean, like they were like nested too much in this. So
Oh, it would take anything would be simpler than this. But at least we're getting a good lesson in manipulating the data, right? Because I mean, so let's twist this into an IT example. Sometimes when we're working on a project, you know, your boss might give you some project to work on, and the data already exists. You have to work with that data, right? That's what we're doing. We're taking somebody else's garbage data that's effectively useless, okay? And we're having to make it work with what we're doing, because it would take too long to rebuild the data. Or there's 10 other applications that are all using that same data. Does that make sense? So this is actually kind of a real life IT problem. You know, it's kind of, so with that in mind, you kind of had a cop out.
no, but I did that same thing with the other database too. But I thought maybe I could make it simpler with mine. So I got both copies and would just do the same thing. Just mine is mine.
So he's the guy that would walk into his boss and says, "Look, the old data was crap. I rewrote it." And then your boss is going to say, "Well, what about the other 30 applications that use it? They're all broken." Anything that used to use that old data won't work anymore. Done. Busted. So now I can pretend like I did this on purpose. It was an IT lesson. Right? All right. Let's see. Boss list. Okay, so we know we're getting our boss list now. All right, so now each of our objects is self-contained, right? So we're going to have a list of the dungeon. Let's let this go ahead and run, make sure it doesn't crash on us or anything like that. Okay, so there's our dungeons. If I click on these different things, I'm not a huge fan of that guy. Well, I just don't like the format. It's not the end of the world, but like these two look okay. But then this one has just the M's at the end of it. You know, just kind of dumb. So yeah, that would have maybe made some more sense. But let's let me do something here real quick. Oh, hold on, I get it. Much nicer. Underscore M. Oh, I get it. It's actually, we're gonna do, this is fine. We just have to do these in the other order. Now it's gonna look good. Just massage our data a little bit. Work out a couple of those knots. All right. And then, that's fine. All right, so now what we'd like to do, so let's kind of get us to a breaking point. We'll take a little break then. So what I want to do is, whichever one of these things we click on, we'd like to be able to click on one of these rows and have us take us to like a dungeon detail screen, right? And that dungeon detail screen should show us the list of bosses. That make sense? So it should be kind of similar to this screen, except it should be a boss list. So at the top, it should have the dungeon name, and then it should have a list of the bosses. And kind of where we're going to go with this, it should have for each of those bosses whether or not we've already killed them this week. That makes sense? That's what's ultimately going to happen. Let's just get it showing that second screen in the list, and then we'll figure out how to do the last piece. All right, so we're going to go back to our storyboard here. We're going to add a new screen. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and we'll put that guy down here. So here's our view controller. And I'll go ahead and we're going to put okay, and we'll say dungeon name is what's going to ultimately go there. So that means we need to have access to this navigation bar is what we're going to need to have. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to give myself a code behind for this guy, the controller aspect of this. And we're going to call this Dungeon Detail VC, Dungeon Detail View Controller. So create a new file, Cocoa Touch class. Here's our UI View Controller. We'll call this guy Dungeon Detail VC. All right. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go back to my, that's not that guy. I'm going to go back to main activity. I'm going to steal this outlet here. Because remember last time I told you that the dragging thing looks cool, but it's actually kind of slow to do it that way. I'm just going to go ahead and drop this outlet in here, and we're going to call this guy Nav Bar. He's going to be a UI navigation bar. Okay. And then we're going to go ahead and say var dungeon name is going to be a string, like that. And I'm saying, trust me, it will be a string. And then inside of viewDidLoad, I'll say self.navbar.topitem.title equals self.dungeon name. It's very strange how you have to access the title of a nav bar. About 96% sure this is the way you do it. All right, so what we want to effectively get the very first time is we want to have this situation where we click on something on our table view, it takes us to the next screen and has the right dungeon name at the top. Okay, now we also need to have a way of getting back. Right? Okay, so what I'll go ahead and do here is we're going to say at IV action func back button pressed self dot navigation controller dot, oh, actually no, it's not that. It's self dot dismiss animated true, don't do anything upon completion. So that's what that function will do. So I've given myself an outlet, which is a way we access variables. So that's how we access widgets programmatically. And I've given myself an action, which is our events. Now I need to actually hook those up in our storyboard. So first, I'm going to let this guy know that, hey, you're no longer a generic UI view controller. You're now actually a dungeon detail VC. You're one of those guys. Okay? And those guys have two things. They have a nav bar outlet, which we'll go ahead and hook up there. And then they also have a back button press. So we need to go ahead and provide ourselves with a back button. So here's a bar button item. And we'll say back, like that. And then here's our back button press. We'll drag that there. So now that's the button that goes back. Okay? So what we want to happen is when we click on one of our rows on our dungeon list, it's going to take us into this screen and show us, well, right now it's just going to show us the name of the dungeon. We just want to prove that we can get here, have the right dungeon name, and then go back, click on a different dungeon, have it go back here, have the right dungeon name, so on and so forth. Passing information between the two. Now, in order to do this, we're going to have a way of creating the second page. So right now, inside of our application, on the iPhone side, we've done everything inside of that main activity, right? We were mimicking what we had done on the Android side. Now, when we want to launch another screen on Android, we create an intent and we provide it the name of the class that we want to launch, right? We can do something kind of similar in iOS. We do it using the storyboard. So we design stuff out here in the storyboard, and then we ask the storyboard to go ahead and create for us an instance of one of the things. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use the same name as the class name, but I'm going to come down here to where it says storyboard ID. This is the unique way of identifying this guy with a unique storyboard ID. Okay, so now that I know how to talk to this dude, I'm going to go back to our dungeon list, because this dungeon list, this is the guy that can respond to clicks on our table. All right, so right now we have, remember that this guy is a table view controller, and table view controllers come with two things. They have a table view data source, and they have a table view delegate. Table view data source is the functions associated with what information should I show. Table view delegate has functions associated with what happens when I click and drag and stuff. Okay? So for us, the one event we want to deal with is I clicked on one of these rows. Do something. Okay? So here's our table view data source stuff. Okay? And then I always thought it was kind of funny that they don't actually give you the table view delegate functions, which is just all very strange. So I think it's did select row at. So you can start typing it in, but you know, some of these things you would have to probably look up if you hadn't done it before. I mean, Xcode is nice that once you start typing it, if it thinks it knows what you mean, it'll fill it in. But you know, so this is one of the data. This is one of the delegate methods for UI table views. This guy will automatically get called when we tap on one of those rows. All right, and he's going to tell us that's the index path that was tapped. All right. So no matter which index path was tapped, we want to go ahead and create a new view controller that we're going to launch. Okay, and that view controller is going to be of type detail, dungeon detail VC. So we're going to say let VC equal self.storyboard. So all view controllers know about the storyboard. They all share that. So we're going to say self.storyboard.instantiate view controller with identifier. The identifier is called dungeon detail VC. Okay, now that guy will come out as a generic UI view controller by default. We happen to know that it's actually a dungeon detail VC. He's one of those guys. That's pretty much the same thing as when you're saying, you know, this dot find view by ID, giving it the ID, and then you say this is actually a button. Or this is actually a text view as opposed to just a standard view in Android. Okay, if we don't specify, Swift will assume that this guy is coming out as a generic plain Jane view controller. But we want to be able to talk to him as a dungeon detail VC because we want to be able to say, hey, your name, your dungeon name, and we'll just hard code one in there for right now. It's going to be LOL. Okay? So now this is an interesting thing, and this is the same thing happens on Android. So that's why I wanted to do these two things, A, so you can see iOS, and B, you can appreciate that even though the technologies seem very different, they're actually the same. They're basically the same. You just learn the little idiosyncrasies and stuff with Swift. All right, so and here's a truth. So if I go back here to dungeon detail, I have this nav bar, and I want to set the name for that nav bar. The first time I have access to that guy is inside of view did load, okay, which is kind of like on create in Android. All right, so this is during the life cycle of an activity or the life cycle of a view controller. This is our first opportunity to start messing around with the widgets that are on the screen. Before this point, they don't actually exist. So the issue here is I come back here to our dungeon list, I can't say vc dot navbar dot top item dot title equals LOL. I can't do that. It's not an error yet, but at runtime, I'm going to get a null pointer exception. This is going to scream at me. It's going to say, that guy doesn't exist. Because all that is happening before view did load. Because at this point, we're creating this view controller, but not until we actually try to display it on the screen does Apple waste its time loading it. Does that make sense? Okay. So I don't have access to that widget yet. So if I want to get that dungeon name in there, what I have to do is I can set this variable equal to it. Then over here in our dungeon detail, when viewDidLoad finally does get called, I can then set my nav bar's title equal to whatever the value of that string is. Does that make sense? Exact same thing happens in Android. Okay, because you don't want to use up tons of memory. Because you got to consider you might have an application, and inside that application there might be 20 screens, 20 activities. Now, maybe 17 of those activities never actually make their way onto the screen because you never click on the right stuff to make them show up. You don't want the things related to those activities taking up, actual memory, right? Things like strings and ints, those are tiny. That's not. But when you start thinking about, the stuff that looks like something on the screen, that weighs something. That takes up some memory. So we want to be good stewards with that. So we're not just going to load the world. Okay. Last time we talked about with our dungeon list, this guy right here. And Android does the same thing. We do this DQ reusable cell. So it only gives you enough cells for what you see on the screen plus a couple on either end. So that as you scroll through, you think there's an infinite number of cells. And there's actually like only 12. Okay, and the guy that's just about to come on the screen, he quickly replaces all the crap on there so it has the new text and stuff. Okay, but it's the same cell you just saw a second ago. Does that make sense? So there's a lot of little tricks like that you're relying on refresh rates and the performance of the device as opposed to the memory of the device. So you don't take up a whole lot of memory because the devices, by historical standards, have a lot of memory. But this is the latest, greatest, this is the best iPhone they make, right? So this is the 7 Plus with the 256 gigs of storage. Okay, big iPhone. I think this device this one might have 4 gigs of RAM, but I think it's actually 2. Okay, but max, it's 4 gigabytes of RAM. Right? But in general, 4 gigabytes of RAM doesn't blow us away, right? If you bought a laptop today that came with 4 gigabytes of RAM, you wouldn't, that wouldn't be impressive to you. You would probably look at it and say, that's kind of like the bare minimum I think I could work with. Fair enough? My wife, I got her a laptop because we're going to be down in Florida, and she works remotely anyways. But at home, she has her office and stuff set up. But she's going to work, she's a programmer as well, and she's going to do her work down in Florida. And and she's a COBOL programmer. Very old school stuff. So she wanted a big laptop. It had to have all the function keys and all that stuff. But, punchline is, the laptop that was the best fit for her actually was a budget pleaser laptop. 17-inch screen, big giant keyboard, was like $200 or $300, not an expensive laptop, right? She didn't like the expensive ones. Screens were too small, it didn't have all the extra buttons, she wanted all the stuff. The thing was almost unusably slow with 4 gig because it came with 4 gigabytes of RAM. So I doubled it to 8 gigabytes. I just put the chip in yesterday, and now it's fast. Or fast enough for her, but if you're a COBOL programmer, you're basically working on a text screen. But the punchline is nobody's impressed with 4 gigabytes of RAM. And we can imagine with today's applications, we're starting to push the video games and stuff like that are showing up on these. You got to assume those are going to use a lot of video memory, right? Okay, and that's going to be shared with the RAM on the actual device on these mobile devices. We only have so much space inside of these guys, right? All right, so something for us to kind of consider is they're trying to take as many shortcuts as they can to minimize the memory usage so they can minimize the amount of stuff they have to put in these, which then maximizes their profit because they get more money from you for less, right? Yeah, you gotta love that. Don't you love giving Apple money? Oh, you guys are iPhone users? Who's an iPhone user?
I had one, but I burned that.
Your iPhone?
Yeah.
Okay, and what are you using? Which phone?
5S.
5S.
Yeah.
I was Xiaomi.
5S?
That's usually for calling.
I don't even use this for calling. I use this for everything but calling. How do you function on a 5S? My 6S Plus, last year's flagship phone. You know where that is right now? So every year I get the new iPhone, right? Where do you think my 6S Plus is?
You got that wrap from?
Huh?
Did you got that gift wrap from?
No, well, I mean, I don't know if you want it. It's a soap dish. I have it in my shower. It holds a bar of soap.
Yeah.
My past soap dishes, I had a 6 Plus as a soap dish. Then I had a 5S as a soap dish. Okay. So your phone you currently use was my soap dish 3 years ago.
We usually try to save our small money to pay the bills and things.
You could sell that on eBay. Unlock it. Now, you could usually actually, if you play it right, if you go through the effort to do it, you could probably get a free iPhone every year, or effectively get a free iPhone every year. If you get, you have your contract, you get the new phone, you use it for a year, you unlock it, sell it internationally, the unlocked phone, then go and get the new regular one. Use it for a year, unlock it, because you get a big premium when you unlock it.
But it's not getting complex to unlock the iPhone nowadays for 6% and all that. You gotta need to remove the whole chip from the back side and then flash it all the way. But you have to just remove it from the phone. You have to open.
You mean to unlock it?
Yeah.
No. If you keep it for the year, your carrier will unlock it.
Oh.
You just have to contact the carrier and say, I'm going to sell my phone because I'm going to get a new one with you guys. Will you unlock this? And they send a little signal to it and it's unlocked.
I was gonna unlock it in 1 month.
Oh, like right after you got it? Yeah, it's a little tougher, but.
It's
5S. Yeah, I used to have to use little tiny soaps. And now I can fit huge soaps on
I
this.
have to go one day and take those all soap cases.
Take all my soap cases. Oh, have you seen that? That's when the iPad first came out. There was a video of you know what he's talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's just chopping it up. He sticks it in the dishwasher. It's like, whoa. All right. So yeah, so we were talking about. So this Nav Bar is not available yet here. So the trick to get around that is we gave ourselves a string that we do have access to. All right, and that string we can then use when viewDidLoad eventually gets called to set that title. Okay? But now, as of right now, that viewDidLoad will never get called. Because back here, I'm creating that view controller using my storyboard. I'm setting that view controller string equal to something. But because I'm never actually showing that view controller on the screen, it never calls viewDidLoad. So I'm going to say self.present. Here's the view controller to present as VC. Do I want it to be animated? Yes. And then this is a callback for what you want to happen when it's finished loading. I'm not going to do anything, so nil. So this is kind of like telling, creating an intent from an activity, telling it to launch another activity. All right, pretty similar type of thing. The difference is that in Android, each activity is kind of like its own app, where in iOS, the application is a container of view controllers. So the organization is a little bit different, but similar enough that we're not talking about completely different setups. So now, because I'm actually showing this new view controller on the screen, now viewDidLoad will get called. Make sense? All right. So let's go ahead and we should see when we, no matter what we click on, it should take us to a screen that says title LOL. And then well, then we won't have anything else on there. So I'll click on I have Ashara. There's our LOL. We can hit back. Click over here to Mythic, Black Rook Hold. There's our LOL. Like that. All right. Oh, it is. It is duplicating. Oh, I did this on purpose.
I did not.
No, I didn't do this on purpose, but I can pretend like I did now because it's. Remember earlier when let's see, where was I? Here in our main activity, right? No, dungeon list. Remember when we moved all this stuff into view did appear? Every single time this view shows up on the screen, the first time and every single time we hit back, it's grabbing all the dungeons again. So why don't we go ahead and shuffle that guy back into view did load so it only happens once. Now it should not reload the stuff. All right, so I'll click on something, we come back, still the same list. Oh yeah, those guys don't change. Click on something, go back, still the same list. Okay, so last thing we want to do now is instead of having them all say LOL, we want to get the actual name of the dungeon that was clicked. All right, now we happen to know as we click on these tabs up here that cur list, isn't that what we called it? Yeah, cur list changes. So when we click on a row, we actually just clicked on one of the rows in cur list. And that element is a dungeon, and I can get that dungeon's name. So let selected dungeon equal self dot cur list at bucket index path dot row. What row did you click on in the current list? Current list is going to point to either normal, heroic, or mythic. Then I can say selected dungeon dot name. Does that make sense? So click on I have Ashara, there's I have Ashara, go to Mythic, click on Halls of Valor, there's Halls of Valor. Go back to Heroic, click on Neltharion's Lair, there's Neltharion's Lair. Make sense? Okay, so let's take about a 10-minute break. Is that enough? Huh? Yeah, so 11-minute break. You get an 11-minute break. So come back at 8:10. Let's keep trucking because we got to get everything done tonight. This is it. All right, 11 minutes, go.